Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about wide receivers to target in your 2019 fantasy football drafts. So today, I'm going to be talking about 3 different wide receivers who, in my opinion, are being undervalued excessively this offseason. They had fantastic 2018 seasons, and I think that's going to carry over into 2019. So before we get into that, I want to go ahead and remind all of you, if you haven't already, click that subscribe button. This week's challenge, we have Xavier Rhodes playing some tight press coverage. Get that cursor past him with a 9 route, a slant, a hitch and go, a zig route, a corner. Either way, get that button clicked, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and join the community. Try to get me to 5,000 subs. For those of you who have already subbed, much appreciated. And let's get to the video, shall we? All right. Hey, everybody. Okay, so here's the deal. Just want to preface before we begin. These 3 wide receivers, I think, obviously you know the thumbnail, but I think they've been kind of getting torched this offseason and highly undervalued in fantasy drafts, either with me doing mocks or watching other people draft. I've kind of gotten a sense that they're just being undervalued. So I just kind of wanted to give you guys my 2 cents on the position statistically and my thoughts on how they'll perform in 2019 to kind of give you another perspective. So without further ado, let's talk about my number 1 wide receiver we're going to talk about today, Julian Edelman. Okay, so what did Julian Edelman accomplish as of late? Well, we know he's reigning Super Bowl MVP of the 2018 season. He absolutely torched the Los Angeles Rams defense. But in his last 16 games, including the playoffs, he's accumulated some astonishing numbers: 156 targets, 105 receptions, 1,325 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns, and all of that going for 14.7 fantasy points per game in half-point PPR scoring formats. I mean, Julian Edelman has been absolutely consistent in fantasy in the NFL, and as Brady's number 1 target, he's been fantastic. In 13 of those 16 games, or of his last 16 games, he's had at least 85 receiving yards and or a touchdown in those games. Another moniker of where he's just completely Mr. Consistent as of late and just continuing to get better. You know, a lot of people, when they think of Julian Edelman, really fantasy-wise, we haven't seen him very often. This last season, missed the first 4 games of the regular season because of performance-enhancing drugs. He got popped, suspension. The year prior, missed the entirety of the 2017 season because of an ACL injury. So we really haven't seen Julian Edelman as of late. And for those of you who owned him last season, you had him at a pretty good discount considering he was going to miss the first quarter of the season. So as of right now, Julian Edelman, I think that's kind of carrying over for him going into 2019. Last season, in those 12 regular season games that he did play, he had 4 wide receiver 1 performances, 6 wide receiver 2 performances, and 2 wide receiver 3 performances in half-point PPR scoring formats. Again, as we'll go and we'll talk about as the offseason progresses, as we get closer and closer to that 2019 fantasy football season, you'll see that when you have a wide receiver that's capable of having wide receiver 1 and 2 performances as consistently as Edelman did last season, that is absolutely one of the most valuable things you can have, because at the wide receiver position, a position that's so volatile, whether there's guys like Albert Wilson or Tyreek Hill having amazing weeks because of their deep threat ability, or it's guys like Julio or Robert Woods just scoring multiple touchdowns in a singular game, the position is extremely unpredictable on a weekly basis, and being able to be as consistent as Julian Edelman was last season, that's just fantastic. And I think it should not be looked over or upon with less value than other guys are kind of being looked at. Now, here's the thing. As of right now, his current ADP sits at a wide receiver 15, meaning he's the 15th wide receiver coming off the board, according to fantasypros.com. Now, as of right now, I think that's even being generous. Go do a mock draft right now, a live mock draft. I guarantee you, Julian Edelman might even be taken later in your drafts. And why is that? Because a lot of people don't associate Julian Edelman as being a fantastic fantasy contributor. Yes, they see him as Tom Brady's number 1 blanket, kind of safety blanket receiver. They see him as, he's been playing in the slot for X amount of years. He's been great. Sure. But they don't see him as a guy that is going to be fantasy relevant. But as of the last 16 games of his career, he's been fantastic. Let's talk about the Patriots. Outside of James White last season, really, what other receiving option was there? Until Julian Edelman got back into this offense, they struggled a lot. They had Josh Gordon for a little bit. He was gone. Now this coming offseason, Rob Gronkowski has retired. Cordero Patterson moved on through free agency. Chris Hogan, gone. They have practically probably one of the thinnest wide receiver cores in Patriots history as long as I can remember. I mean, outside of Edelman, you have Philip Dorsett, you have N'Keal Harry, who was just drafted in the first round of the 2019 NFL Draft, and you have Demaryius Thomas coming back from an Achilles injury. And as we saw the other day with Kevin Durant, Achilles injuries are not to be messed around with. And it's really tough to come back from those kind of an injury, especially with Demaryius Thomas being later in his career, probably on the back nine for sure. So as of right now, I think Julian Edelman going into 2019 drafts, talking about the players that are really being disrespected, I think he can honestly be a top 12 wide receiver. A lot of that has to do with the fact that, hey, if you have a high amount of touchdowns, you're going to be in that conversation. But I think Julian Edelman, as the number one wide receiver of the Patriots offense going into 2019, he has a great possibility and great potential to be a wide receiver that, yes, is being slept upon, and you can go ahead and draft him at a discount, and he's going to perform for you on a weekly basis. Just talking about other wide receivers taken in that range. When it comes to guys like AJ Green or like Jarvis Landry at that wide receiver 2 spot, Julian Edelman is probably going to go after them. When people see those other names, they instantly they get triggered. They get tilted and they go ahead and lock in an AJ Green, even though he's been injured for 2 out of the last 3 seasons, missed significant time. The way I see it, I think Julian Edelman is a guy that if you wait on in drafts, you can take him later even than the wide receiver 15 spot, and he can perform potentially as a wide receiver 1 this season. So that's my first receiver that I want you to take a look at and perhaps target in 2019. All right, so the next guy, we're going to play a little bit of guess who. All right, this next wide receiver literally had 1 less target than he did in 2017. So in 2017, he had 71 targets. He followed that up with 70 targets, yet he finishes a wide receiver 2 on a predominantly heavy run offense. Also, due to the circumstances that he played in, he ended up being the number 1 wide receiver on the team because of other injuries. And I think a lot of this hype that was around him last season has kind of fallen off. And I think this wide receiver should be more respected. A guy that has been known for being a special teams and deep threat for the Seattle Seahawks. My next wide receiver is Tyler Lockett. All right, now I understand. Many of you may be thinking, Andrew, you're absolutely crazy. Why do you have Tyler Lockett as a wide receiver to target? Now, let me let you know. Tyler Lockett, yes, he had a fantastic 2018 season. Some may be thinking those numbers that he produced, they're unsustainable. Now, I understand your argument. I 100% see it. But hear me out. Last season, 70 targets, 57 receptions, 965 receiving yards, 10 receiving touchdowns, and 12.12 fantasy points per game in half-point PPR scoring formats. So, just looking at those statistics, Tyler Lockett from the year prior, oh my goodness. He had, maybe 14 less receptions, but jumped nearly 300 receiving yards, went up nearly 8 receiving touchdowns. Now, I know what you may be thinking. I always preach that touchdowns are a number that you really can't predict in fantasy. They're very volatile. But I think Tyler Lockett could stay consistent in 2019 because of some factors. Number 1, mainly, Doug Baldwin. Doug Baldwin's retired. He is no longer a part of the Seattle Seahawks. And as a guy who has been the clear wide receiver 1 for seasons past, those targets got to go somewhere. And I think they're going towards Tyler Lockett. Just talking about Doug Baldwin's targets, 103 in 2015, 125 in 2016, and 116 in 2017. A guy that has had 14 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns in those 3 seasons. Doug Baldwin, yes, he was the number 1 wide receiver, but he's gone. And who's the number 1 wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks offense? It's undoubtedly Tyler Lockett. It's not going to be guys like DK Metcalf or Jerron Brown or David Moore, Will Disley, Nick Vannett. Those receivers or receiving options, they're not going to be able to have the amount of productive weeks like Tyler Lockett will have. And that's why Russell Wilson continues to trust him. Last season, together, they had 158.3 passer rating when targeted. Tyler Lockett was the most efficient wide receiver in NFL history on his targets. Go look it up according to Pro Football Focus. Go look up that article. I'll probably put it in the description. Unbelievable. On top of it, we know Tyler Lockett's a deep threat. And that's why he had 17 receptions of 20 plus yards last season, because he's capable of doing that. Only on a 16.39% target share last season. Imagine that. With only 16% of the targets last season, Tyler Lockett had 3 less targets than Doug Baldwin did last season, and we know Doug Baldwin was not healthy for nearly half of the season. Imagine that. Tyler Lockett's going to get an increase in targets. Those targets are going to lead to opportunity. And with the amount of productive, goodness gracious, the productive nature that Tyler Lockett has had just in 2018, I see good things happening for him in 2019. Now, the reason why I want you to target him isn't because of the fact that Tyler Lockett had a great 2018 season. It's because in 2019, he's going to be used as the wide receiver one. They're already talking about moving him around the offense, whether that's outside, moving him towards the slot where Doug Baldwin's pretty much reigned over his career, and just moving everywhere within this offense in order to be this team's number one receiver. And I think that kind of opportunity is going to lead to success. And because of the fact that so many people are aware of just how amazing Lockett's season was last year, he's dropping down draft boards. People are doubting his value because they feel, yes, it's unsustainable and he's unpredictable. He's a receiver that may be boom or bust. Sure, that is an argument. But in my opinion, because of the fact that he is going to be leading this team, yes, they may be a run-first team, but he's going to have the opportunity there. And I think as he drops down boards, he's going to be presented as a pretty good receiver at a pretty decent value. And that's why I like Tyler Lockett as one of my targets this season. All right, let's talk about the last receiver that I want to go over. This wide receiver, another glitchy wide receiver. We just went over a slot receiver that was absolutely ridiculous in his last 16 games. We went over a guy that has been a deep threat and a special teams kind of guy throughout his entire career, have one of the best wide receiver statistics in NFL history. And now we're going over a guy that he is a bigger framed guy. He is responsible for winning a national championship with Deshaun Watson at Clemson. He's a receiver that in his first season dealt with much injury and really just kind of squandered his rookie year. But in his sophomore campaign in the NFL, as pretty much the wide receiver 2/3 of this team, produced heavily in the red zone. And that's why I want to talk about my next wide receiver here. We're talking about Mike Evans of the Los Angeles Chargers. All right, so here's the thing about Mike Evans. Now, I know what you may be thinking. Similar to Tyler Lockett, this is another receiver that may be unpredictable and may be dropping down draft boards because of this fact. Now, listen to me. I'm telling you, Mike Williams is another wide receiver that is just being undervalued that you need to target. This is another sleeper that honestly is dropping down draft boards. His current ADP sits as the number 30 wide receiver coming off boards. That in itself, that's a steal. Mike Williams ended as the number 24 ranked wide receiver last season, and that's only going to increase. Last season, he had 66 targets, 43 receptions, 664 receiving yards, 10 receiving touchdowns for 9.92 fantasy points per game. Now, here's the thing. Here's a couple stats that we want to go over. Last season, Mike Williams, really doesn't seem like a guy that maybe the deep threat option of this offense, but he was. He tied for the most receptions of 20-plus more yards, tied with Tyrell Williams. But as we know, Tyrell Williams, he's no longer with the Los Angeles Chargers. A guy that in 2016 was a number one wide receiver. Tyrell Williams has gone on to the Raiders, and he's opened up more opportunity for Mike Williams in this offense. Now, you may be thinking, how much opportunity, Andrew? Well, I'll tell you. In the last couple seasons, Mike Williams has not only Tyrell Williams has not only outsnapped Mike Williams. Let's go with the first names. So Tyrell, in the last couple seasons, has not only outsnapped him, but he's had the same amount of targets, literally almost the same amount of receptions, and he's been taking away those snap counts. So if we get rid of Tyrell Williams, a guy that had 11 receptions of 20 plus yards, also a guy that has been a deep threat in the past, has seen red zone targets here and there. If we completely take him out of this offense and we make sure that Mike Williams is the number 2 wide receiver, which as we're looking around, there really isn't anybody else on this depth chart to be the number 2 wide receiver of the Los Angeles Chargers, Mike Williams is going to have a pretty big increase in targets this coming season. And what are those targets going to lead to? They're going to lead to success, in my opinion. Last season, he had a 19.71 red zone target share, nearly 20% of the targets going his way, leading to 14 targets, 7 receptions. All 7 receptions led to receiving touchdowns. Here's my thought process. If Tyrell Williams is no longer there, and Mike Williams is finally given the number 2 wide receiver spot when it comes to snaps, targets, opportunity, he's only going to improve. I mean, he was drafted I think he was a first-round pick. If I'm not mistaken, he was the 2nd wide receiver off the board in 2017. I think a little bit behind Corey Davis, if I'm not mistaken. A guy that, over his career, has gotten more and more comfortable within this offense. Phillip Rivers has continued more and more to target him, have more confidence in him. And I understand you may be thinking, well, what about Hunter Henry coming back? Sure, Hunter Henry can come back. He'll go ahead and absorb all of Virgil Green and Antonio Gates' targets. That's not a big deal. But those Tyrell Williams targets, they're going somewhere, and I believe they're going towards Mike. And I think big number 81 in the red zone is a glitchy wide receiver that is just snagging touchdowns on a weekly basis. This is a guy that can be depended on in fantasy. And because of the fact that he is dropping down draft boards like a hot potato, you can have him as a wide receiver 3, perhaps even 4 on your team, depending on the guys in your league. I think a lot of people are really just undervaluing the fact that this is a wide receiver in a top 10 NFL offense with a quarterback that, quite frankly, continues to get better like a fine wine with age. Phillip Rivers continues to somehow throw 30 touchdowns a season. And I think a lot of that is going to go towards Mike Williams. And I have a lot of confidence that he's a wide receiver that you can target at a very cheap value. I mean, wide receiver 30 off the board, he'll probably go even later. And that presents a lot of value for fantasy owners. Anyway, those are the 3 wide receivers I wanted to talk about today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button. If you like the video, click the like button. If you have any comments, concerns, questions, if you just want to talk shit to me in the comment section, go for it. I probably won't respond because I'm not a child. Anyway, thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for all the support. And until next time, I'll probably be doing a mock draft video tomorrow, Saturday. I don't know. We'll see. But probably tomorrow. I'm not that lazy. All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.